Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really fascinating contradiction. We're looking at a nation that holds the largest pile of collective wealth in human history, yet actively refuses to act like it. It's a country that by almost any measurement is one of the wealthiest to have ever existed, but, and here's the catch, by a self-imposed cultural agreement, they simply aren't allowed to flaunt it.
To wrap our heads around the sheer scale of what we're talking about, let's look at the numbers. As of early 2026, Norway's sovereign wealth fund has swelled to over $2 trillion. That is an almost unfathomable amount of money. It's been quietly generated and carefully saved, making it the absolute largest sovereign wealth fund of any kind anywhere on Earth.
But to really understand the personal stakes, let's bring that massive number down to the human level. That staggering $2 trillion sum breaks down to roughly $390,000 for every single Norwegian citizen. Think about that. Every man, woman, and child essentially has nearly $400,000 sitting in a collective national savings account.
So the big question driving this explainer, and really a profound question about human nature, is this. How does a society handle this much power and this much extreme wealth without losing its soul? Why this matters to us is that it serves as a real-time experiment. It asks whether wealth inevitably corrupts, or if a strong enough culture can actually tame it.
What's actually kind of jarring is the contrast between their massive global footprint and their stubbornly humble daily reality. On one hand, they own roughly 1.5% of every publicly traded stock on Earth. But on the other hand, there's literally no privacy around money. Anyone can look up their neighbor's income online. It's a society where the king has been photographed riding the Oslo subway and the prime minister just casually bicycles to work.
Part 1. Carved by ice and time. How geography shaped a mindset.
You see, this deep modesty wasn't just invented yesterday. It was forged by a brutal, freezing landscape that demanded practical endurance for centuries. When you look at their history, this is a landscape defined by ice and simple survival. 40 separate ice ages ground down glaciers to carve out those deep fjords. From Viking longships built for incredibly rough oceans to 14th century merchants dealing in dried stockfish that could last a decade without spoiling, this history bred a culture that absolutely had to value durability over flashiness. Survival meant planning for the long winter.
And that impulse to just make it last explains so much. It's why they preserve their 900-year-old wooden stave churches. They didn't keep them just as art, but practically maintained them, tarring them every 2 decades, because they were useful. We see this in the environment too. They spent 50 years quietly rescuing nearly extinct white-tailed sea eagles and Arctic foxes. They didn't build giant monuments to celebrate saving these animals, they just did it, because stewardship is just in their DNA.
Part 2. Striking Black Gold, the 1969 Ekofisk discovery.
Okay, picture this. It's late December 1969. A company called Phillips Petroleum was drilling what was supposed to be their final desperate attempt in the North Sea. Just days before Christmas, boom, the drill bit breaks through into a massive layer of crude oil. But instead of going on an immediate spending spree, which, let's be honest, is what human nature usually dictates, the Norwegian parliament unanimously passed these 10 commandments in 1972. It is a breathtaking display of national restraint. They immediately declared that the wealth belonged to the entire population, including those not yet born. They aimed directly at protecting the future from the present.
By doing this, Norway actively avoided what economists called the resource curse, while so many other oil-rich nations suffered from hollowed-out economies, hyperinflation, and conflict, mostly because the sudden influx of cash distorted everything. Norway's model deliberately saved revenues abroad. That way, they wouldn't hyperinflate their own currency, completely sustaining their egalitarian society.
Part 3. The Law of Jante, the Cultural Code.
But, to truly grasp how they actually resisted the temptation to spend it all, we have to look past the economics and look at Janteloven, or the Law of Jante. Originally written down in a 1933 novel as a sort of satire of small-town life, it operates as an unspoken social law woven entirely into the fabric of the country. It actively suppresses anyone attempting to flaunt wealth or claim they're fundamentally better than their neighbor. Now, I know these rules sound incredibly harsh to an outsider's ear, like, you are not to think you are anything special. Wow. But these are self-imposed to maintain strict equality, to the point where showing off, bragging about your achievements, or buying an overly flashy car gets you quietly but firmly excluded from the social circle. It keeps egos and, obviously, spending heavily in check.
And this mindset grounds them in uniquely Norwegian concepts like friluftsliv.
Even with trillions collectively in the bank, the ideal Norwegian weekend isn't spent at some luxury resort. No way. It's spent hiking the freezing mountain plateaus, staying in basic, unlocked wooden cabins maintained by the Trekking Association, and actually paying for firewood using a simple cashbox honor system. They literally consider better, in the luxurious sense, to actually be worse.
This profound modesty applies to absolutely everything. Take Joachim Roneberg, the young leader of the daring World War II heavy water sabotage mission that massively set back Nazi nuclear ambitions. When asked about his heroism, his genuine response was simply, "We just did our job." He completely refused fame. We also see this cultural sobriety in their ongoing reconciliation with the indigenous Sami people, officially recognizing their ancient, modest logic of moving with the seasons and taking only what is needed from the land.
We even saw this remarkable restraint in their justice system during one of their absolute darkest hours. After the horrific 2011 terrorist attacks in Oslo and the island of Utøya, the nation didn't demand sweeping new police powers or vengeance. Instead, they prosecuted the attacker with standard, ordinary procedural restraint, vowing that their answer as a country would be more democracy, more openness, and more humanity.
Part 4. Managing the Trillions, the Sovereign Wealth Fund.
So, the actual physical numbers we are looking at here are simply staggering. This single fund, managed out of modest offices in Oslo, owns roughly 1.5% of every publicly traded stock on planet Earth. Apple, Microsoft, Nestle, they have a piece of it all. They earned a $247 billion profit last year alone. That's more than the entire economic output of many small countries.
But here's the kicker. They bind themselves by incredibly strict investment rules to ensure the money doesn't poison the culture. Step 1, absolutely zero investment inside Norway. Step 2, transparent, predictable index tracking instead of wild gambling. And step 3, which is arguably the most important rule of the whole shebang, politicians are forbidden by powerful political convention from ever withdrawing more than 3% a year. The principle is locked away for future generations.
This commitment prioritizes principle over profit, for sure. The fund maintains a strict, publicly visible ethical exclusion list. They will proactively divest from companies tied to nuclear weapons production, severe environmental damage, and human rights issues. And these decisions are made by an independent ethics council, completely removed from the pressure of elected officials.
The culture of modesty is so strong that when Nikolai Tangen, a highly successful hedge fund manager, was hired to run the $2 trillion fund, there was public outrage. Why? Because he was deemed too visibly wealthy. To actually take the job, Tangen had to place his personal fortune into a charitable foundation, take a modest $750,000 salary, and proudly bicycle to work like everyone else, just so the public would trust him.
Finally, Part 5. The post-oil future. Can the culture survive its own success?
So what is the ultimate takeaway for us here? Well, as the mature North Sea oil fields slowly begin to decline, we're watching a third generation of Norwegians grow up who have never known a harsh, poor Norway. Surrounded by global media that constantly celebrate self-promotion, some are beginning to openly push back against the strict modesty of janteloven. We are left with a massive, trillion-dollar question. Can this incredible culture of deep modesty survive its own absolute success in globalization, or will the weight of the wealth finally rewrite their DNA? It's a question the whole world, and Norway itself, is waiting to answer.